Episode 54 begins in outer space. There's a spaceship and it is on its way to third Earth. Of course, that's very interesting. Well, inside the spaceship, we not only have the control room, but the computer said that the ship is, for some reason, off the course. If that's not very bad enough, because inside was a lethally radioactive spear that is so powerful, well, it'll be explained why. So meanwhile on Third Earth and at the Black Pyramid's tomb chamber, something happened just woke up Mumm-ra from his sleep in his sarcophagus. So now he has to find out what is going on. So he went to his cauldron, and as always, he went there to see what happened. And so that's what he did. As Mumm-ra went to take a look in his cauldron to investigate, he pleaded himself a case. He said that there's something going on in outer space, something that's headed towards the Earth, a spaceship, and it has something very dangerous that's carrying it in it. Then Mumm-ra had a thought. As he was watching the spaceship heading towards the Earth, he said, why not use that as an advantage? But unfortunately for Mumm-ra, he's not the only one that saw the spaceship heading that way. The mutants are too, because meanwhile at Castle Plundar, there's Sly, the leader of the mutants. He just went upstairs to hear the alarm going off that's coming from the castle's control room. By the time that he arrived, he met up with Vultureman. So Slythe wanted to know from Vultureman what's going on. Well, according to Vultureman, he said that there's a spaceship that's heading towards the Earth, but better than that, it has a radioactive sphere. As a matter of fact, according to Voltron, when he explained to Slide that the radioactive material in that sphere alone is so dangerous it could blow up everyone. Then Slide made a suggestion by asking a question. Do you mean the sphere is so dangerous that it could blow up the Thundercats sky high instead of us? So Volterman not only agrees with Slide, so you know what this means, just like what Mumm-ra did, the mutants wanted to use that sphere as an advantage too. Oh, speaking of the spaceship, it was still in outer space along with that sphere that is still inside. Also hearing the news about the spaceship that's heading to Third Earth were the Thundercats and Castlear. So meanwhile there, the Thundercats were watching that spaceship in space on the screen in the control room. So in the control room, we have Panthro and Lionel. After they heard the alarm going off, and that's when Panthro was told by Lionel that whatever's going on out there, it triggered the alarms. Now, Panthro, who agrees with Lionel, says, but that's not all. The radiation levels itself are very astronomical. Now, Lionel, who agrees with Panthro, but then he said if the ship ever crashes on the Earth, then this can mean bad news. But what they didn't know is that back at the Pyramid's tomb chamber, watching it happen was Mumm-ra. He played his case to say it may not be only bad news for you, Thundercats, but good news for me, because he just also said in his case that he's the only one that's going to survive. Or at least that's what he thought. So back with Lionel and Panthro in the Kessler's control room, that's when Lionel discussed a plan with Panthro. The only thing to prevent it from happening is to bring the spaceship into the Earth itself by towing it in. And Panthro agrees with Lionel. Not only that, they could find a way to neutralize the sphere itself without harming anyone. So Lionel and Panthro knew that there was no time to lose, so they head off to the Kessler's hangar. But back with Mumm-ra, after he heard about the Thundercats' plan, he decided to have a plan of his own. Now you're probably wondering what was Mumm-ra's plan? Well, he just pleaded a case to say he wanted to stop this from happening. Well, one of the first things he did is that he did what any bad guy would do. Transform himself into his monstrous form, of course. And once he did that, he heads out to Castle Plunder to enlist a favor from the mutants. So meanwhile at Castle Plondar, in the control room we have Volcherman, Jackalman, and Slythe, the mutant's leader. And then Slythe just pleaded a case to say whoever controls the sphere itself in that ship controls the Earth itself, he said. But what Slythe doesn't even realize, he heard the voice of Mumm-ra saying, for once, I agree with you. And then Mumm-ra appears in the control room. The mutants were very surprised to see Mumm-ra had appeared in the castle's control room. He even told them that it's true that the Thundercats had knew all about it. Then what Mumm-ra said to the mutants next was unbelievable. What the Thundercats are planning to do is to neutralize the sphere, and what they are also doing is to bring it right here, he said. Well, Jackalman of the Mutants not only agrees with Mumm-ra when he told him and the mutants the news, that's when Jackalman made a suggestion that we should never allow this to happen. We want it for ourselves, he said. Well, Mumm-ra has his turn to plead a case to not only agree with Jackalman, but he said that he wants it for himself too. So Sly, the mutants' leader, made a suggestion with Mumm-ra. Maybe we can work together to share it, he said. Now, Volterman has his turn to plead a case to not only agree with Slide that they, the mutants and Mumm-ra, should work together, but what he wanted to know from Mumm-ra, what can they get in return once they do this favor for him? Well, to answer Volterman's question, that's when Mumm-ra suggested that once they got the spaceship for themselves and with the radioactive sphere, they can destroy the Thundercats together, he suggested. Plus, even better, Mumm-ra explains further, we can all rule Third Earth once the Thundercats are out of the way. So, Jackalman was asking Mumm-ra a question. Don't you mean us and you? Of course, Mumm-ra said, whatever you say. So you know what this means. Jackalman, Slythe, and Mumm-ra are on the mission. So speaking of which, back with them, they had just arrived at Cat's lair. So what the bad guys saw next was unbelievable. The good guys are about to leave in the Liner in the Kessler's hangar. So Sly told Mumm-ra that the Thundercats are leaving in the Liner right now. Well, in Sly's case, he's not wrong because here comes Panther and Lino in the Kessler's hangar, and they boarded the Liner. After they did that, all Lino and Panther needed to do is to make sure that the Liner systems are working, so the Liner will be all set and ready to go. But unfortunately for the Liner, before it could leave, back with Mumm-ra and the mutants, Mumm-ra knows what to do. He asked for his agent spirits of evil for one request, to turn nighttime from daytime. So that's exactly what they did. So meanwhile, back at the Kessler's hangar, before the Liner could move anywhere, what Lionel saw was unbelievable, a storm in the middle of the night. But how is this possible? Even Panther too has seen it, and he too couldn't believe it. Anyway, while that's going on, back with Slythe and Mumm-ra, what the Thundercats didn't even realize is that Snorm isn't real. It was fake. So, Mumm-ra had just told Slythe, the leader of the mutants, Jackalman, his job is to board a Liner. Also, as Mumm-ra says in his case, there's no better way to have a chance to have Jackalman do this kind of job. So, back with Jackalman, that's exactly what he did. He arrived at the Castler to board a Liner. So, back with Mumm-ra and Slythe, they were watching it as it happened. Well, back with Jackalman, he did exactly what he was supposed to do, and for once he didn't even mess up. Unfortunately for Lino and Panther the Thundercats that were still in the Liner, they were unaware of it. So, speaking of Panther and Lino, back with them, so that's when Lino suggested to Panther they might as well chance it anyway. So they decided that since the Liner systems are all set, it was time for the Liner to leave. So back with Mumm-ra and Slythe, after the feliner left, he wanted to know from Slythe if Slythe is sure that Jackalman will do the job right. And Slythe told Mumm-ra, of course I'm sure. Also, as Slythe says in his case, and he's not kidding, that Jackalman may be a coward, but he's a cunning one. But then it's Mumm-ra's turn to not only agree with Slythe, he says, I hope for your sake that you better be right, he said. So back with the feliner, who is now in outer space. Well, good news for the Thundercats, Lino and Panthro, they found the spaceship. So all they had to do is just tow in the ship so that they can defuse the sphere that was inside of it. So thanks to Pedro, now that the feliner's on top of the ship, the tone beam was activated. But what they didn't know, they being Pedro and Lionel, remember Jackalman of the Mutants? Well, unfortunately for Panther and Lionel, they were not aware that Jackalman had boarded the board, but they had no idea. So speaking of Jackalman back with him, he did what he was supposed to do. What he did is that he jumped down from the feliner and onto the spaceship itself when it was towing into Third Earth by the feliner itself. Still, the Thundercats are not aware of this yet. So speaking of Panthro and Lionel, who had no idea what was going on, they were still towing the ship inside of Third Earth. So far, everything went well. There were no problems. So now that the two ships had made it inside of Third Earth and without a problem, Panthro told Lionel that all they had to do now was to neutralize the spear itself. But they had no idea that inside the spaceship was Jackalman of the Mutants. So speaking of Jackalman, now that he's inside the spaceship itself, one of the first things that he did was to grab the spear that was inside of it. And so that's what he did. And he grabbed it. So back with the Violiner and the spaceship, well, good news, both of the ships had survived intact. Also the good news, they managed to land without a problem. By the way, watching it happen still was Slide, the leader of the mutants, and Mumm-ra. And Mumm-ra just told Slide that Jackalman, for some reason, hasn't arrived yet, and he's holding Slide responsible. But then, out of nowhere, Slide just told Mumm-ra, "Look, there he is, and there's Jackalman now. He's not only out of the spaceship, but he has a spear in his hands. Jackalman did do the job all right." Well, when Sly saw what had happened, he was trying to get Jackalman's attention, but then Murmur had to silence him, and then says, "You don't want the Thundercats to know anything about it, do you?" Oh, speaking of Lionel and Panthro, on the contrary, in Mumra's case, they probably knew by the time that they have arrived at the spaceship, they knew that someone had taken the spear already, and that someone was Jackalman of the Mutants. So back with Lionel and Panthro, now that they knew what had happened, they had to run to catch up to Jackalman that now has a spear in his hands. So back with Mumm-ra and Slice, Mumm-ra is now all upset because Jackalman had decided to keep the spear for himself. Back with Jackalman of the Mutants, he had no idea that both Lionel and Panthro are pursuing him. During the pursuit, that's when Jackalman pleaded the case that Third Earth will answer to him and etc. Back with Lionel and Panthro still in pursuit of Jackalman of the Mutants, that's when Panthro's now all upset because he just told Lionel that all Jackalman cares is to have all the power for himself. Now, Lionel, who agrees with Panthro, he made a case to say if something isn't done soon, if they don't catch up to Jackalman, then Third Earth will receive the bad news, and this could mean a serious problem. So Lionel and Panthro continued to pursue Jackalman. Well, back with Jackalman, he reached a dead end, or so he thought. And that's when Jackalman knew that he was surrounded by Panthro and Lionel of the Thundercats. So back with Jackalman, he told Panthro and Lionel to stay where they are. Then Lionel has his turn to plead a case to Jackalman to say he couldn't have the spear for himself and that it's dangerous and etc. So even though Jackalman agrees but then pleads his case to the Thundercats that he and Mumm-ra will handle it and they can rule third for themselves. So back with Jackalman, he jumped up onto the rocks, and back with Pantro and Lionel, by the time they saw it, they were in shock. But Lionel knows what to do. Instead of himself and Panther being on top of the rocks just as Jackalman did, he uses his sword power instead, where they could take the shortcut, so that's what he did. So, after Jackalman ran off, both Lionel and Panther continued to pursue him. But the Thundercats are not the only ones in pursuit because Slythe and Mumm-ra are too. So Slythe tells Mumm-ra that Jackalman's getting away. So Sly says, "We gotta do something about this." "Well, Jackalman had double crossed you," Mumm-ra said, "so I'll handle this myself," he suggested. So what Mumm-ra did is that he decided to fly up instead. So that's what exactly he did. So back with Jackalman, who Mumm-ra saw from below that was pursued by Lino and Panthro, the Thundercats. So back with Jackalman, who was still being pursued by Lino and Panthro, the Thundercats, but not for long, because here comes Mumm-ra, who just came out from out of nowhere to pick him up. So, when Lionel and Panther saw what had happened, they couldn't believe it. Back with Jackalman that was picked up earlier by Mumm-ra, so Jackalman asked him, "What are you doing?" To answer Jackalman's question, that's when Mumm-ra says, "Well, I just wanted to make sure that we share the spear's power," he said, so they both head off. Now, back with Lionel and Panthro, they now realize where Jackalman and Mumm-ra are going, to the Black Pyramid. So, Lionel knows what to do. He did what any good guy would. He projected a Thundercat signal from his sword. Meanwhile, at Cat's Lair, the Thundercats, the Thunder Kittens, Tiger, Cheetah, and Snarf, by the time they saw the signal, they knew they had to hurry, so they hopped into the Thunder Tank. So they're now on their way. Meanwhile, at Castle Plondar, when Slide, the leader of the mutants, came back, that's when Vultureman asked, "Where's Jackalman? What happened?" That's when Slide told Vultureman the bad news that for some reason Jackalman had turned against him and that he and Mumm-ra are at the Black Pyramid. So Vultureman, after he heard the bad news, that's when he told Slide that the only way to get to the Black Pyramid is by a flying machine, and he knows that they had to get there right away. Back with Lionel and Panthro, they were getting worried that they'll never get to the Black Pyramid in time. And that's when the Thunder Tank showed up, and good thing it did. So after the Thunder Tank picks up Lionel and Panthro, the Thundercats head to the Black Pyramid. At the same time, the flying machine that had Voltrum and Slide that had just left Castle Plondor, they too head straight there. So back with Mumm-ra and Jackalman, they had finally arrived at the Black Pyramid. Then, long story short, Mumm-ra just told Jackalman to hand over the spear, and then Jackalman asked him a question. "What about our deal?" "Remember, you said that we'll rule the earth together," Jackalman said. "What deal?" Mumm-ra asked. "I don't remember us making a deal," Mumm-ra said. "As a matter of fact, I really don't need you," he said. "I just needed the spear itself," Mumm-ra said. "And with this," he explains further, "then I'll destroy anything and anyone, especially everything and everyone," Mumm-ra said. In other words, what he is telling Jackalman that he has to rule the earth all by himself rather than everyone else. Jackalman should have known better than to team up with Mumm-ra because, as anyone will tell you, it was all part of his plan. So just like what Jackalman did to Slice, that's when Mumm-ra turned against him. And as he was about to climb up the pyramid, "Someday, Mumm-ra," Jackalman said, "someday." Before Jackalman can run off, that's when he sees a thunder tank showing up. Jackalman knew that he couldn't stand a chance against the Thunder Tank and the Thundercats themselves, so he ran off. Back with the Thunder Tank and the Thundercats, that's when Lionel realizes that Jackalman doesn't have the reactor anymore. So that means Mumm-ra has it now, and he's on his way to the top of the pyramid. Unless the Thundercats can stop him. So the Thundercats knew that there was no time to lose, so the Thunder Tank decided to go up the pyramid, but before it could do that, back with Mumm-ra, he just looked over his shoulder at the Thunder Tank that had just approached the pyramid itself. So, back with the Thunder Tank, it went ahead and climbed up the pyramid. Back with Mumm-ra, he looked behind him and he saw the Thunder Tank is pursuing him. Back with the Thunder Tank and the Thundercats, they continued their pursuit of Mumm-ra. I forgot to mention that Mumm-ra has a spear under his arm, and that's when he realizes that the Thundercats are not the only ones that are pursuing him, because he looked up in the sky and there's a flying machine that's heading his direction that has Vultureman and Slide, the leader. Anyway, Vultureman just told Slide the good news that they found a reactor. That's when Sly says, "Get the Thundercats first." But Voltman refused and said, "We need the sphere first. We must get that," he suggested. So after, long story short, that Slythe and Voltman are arguing on who's getting what and etc., back with the Thundercats in the Thunder Tank, that's when they saw the mutants are heading in their direction in the flying machine with Voltman and Slythe. As the Thunder Tank prepare for an attack, but they're not the only ones because the flying machine is doing the same. Long story short, the flying machine just missed this attack on the Thunder Tank. Back with Mumm-ra, he still has a spear under his arm, and that's when he's pleaded his case to say no one's going to stop him, and that's when he attacked the flying machine. Back with the flying machine now out of control because of Mumm-ra's attack, that's when Slice panicked and said, "We're going to crash! I told you we should have gotten the reactor first," Voltman said. Back with the flying machine, long story short, it was about to crash into the desert of sinking sands, but luckily for Voltman, he maintains control. Long story short, back with Mumm-ra, he's now on the top of his own pyramid. He pleaded his case with the Thundercats to say there's nothing you could do about it, and that Third Earth is his, and etc. So back with the flying machine, now that it maintained control, it started attacking Mumm-ra, but Mumm-ra attacks back. After the battle between Mumm-ra and the flying machine went on and on and on and on, until finally, after Mumm-ra attacks it for the second time, but this time the flying machine crashed, back with the Thunder Tank, and continues to climb up the pyramid in pursuit. But what the Thundercats didn't know is that Mumm-ra has a plan. What he did is that he pushes the top of his pyramid off, so it'll block the Thunder Tank's way. Now that the Thundercats have found out that the tank's not going anywhere at the moment, that's when Lionel says, "Everybody out, let's split up." So that's what they did. But again, back with Mumm-ra, he started pleading his case and taunting him to say, "Forget it, Earth is mine," he said. So Mumm-ra does what he knows best. He uses his power on the pyramid, and each attack it takes on the Thundercats, they had dodged every attack. First Panthro, then Tigra, then the Thunderkins, then Chitara. The two Thundercats that are still standing are Lionel and Snarf, so Lionel told Mumm-ra, "Hand it over." "If you want it," Mumm-ra said, "come and get it." Then long story short, all four of the Thundercats had tried their attacks on Mumm-ra, but nothing worked. So now it's up to Snarf to take matters in his own hands. So he went up. But Snarf's not the only one who joins in the attack, but Tigra did too. So thanks to Tigra's Bullwhip, who created a smoke screen to blind Mumm-ra for a while, then it's up to Snarf. What he did is he tripped Mumm-ra with his tail. But now here comes a bigger problem. Because of Snarf tripping Mumm-ra, he lost the spear. So Lionel says, "Someone catch it." Luckily, the Thundercat who caught it was Panthro, and good thing he did. Back with Panthro and Mumm-ra, they continue to fall down the pyramid until, thanks to Panthro, with a little help from his spikes, of course, he landed on the ground intact and with the spear in hand, but not so much for Mumm-ra. Back with Mumm-ra, who was on the ground, and with Panthro, he said to Panthro, "Give me that spear." So Panthro says, "If you want it, you'll have to take it first." So before Mumm-ra could do anything about it, next thing you know, what Mumm-ra saw was his own reflection on the sphere. And he hated it. He despised it. So I guess this means that Mumm-ra doesn't want the spear after all. Back on the pyramid, Lionel says, "Way to go, Panthro." And of course, he's not kidding because it was Panthro who saved the day. So after the rest of the Thundercats went into the Thunder Tank bath with Panthro, and of course Mumm-ra, who was defeated by his own reflection, before Mumm-ra can go into his own pyramid, he made a vow that there will be always be next time. So after that, he heads off. "Yes, sure," Panther said. "We heard it all before." And that's when he saw a Thunder Tank pull up with Lionel driving it. So he says, "Pretty neat catch, Panther. You got any more tricks?" "No," Panther says. "Let's just get out of here." And so the Thundercats head off and went back to the cat's lair in the Thunder Tank. So meanwhile, back at Kessler, now that the sphere's back in the ship where it belongs, it's now time for the ship to leave the Earth. In the control room, as the Thundercats were watching it happen, that's when Panther says the sooner the ship leaves the Earth, the better that everybody else can feel. And of course, Lionel, who agrees with him, he asked the question, "Are you sure it's not going to do any damage after it left?" Well, to answer Lionel's question, Tiger says, well, first of all, yes, that he's sure. Second of all, according to what he said, that the only thing that the sphere will destroy is the spaceship itself, rather than their Earth. Anyway, the Thunderkins have pleaded their cases to say, if only those creepy mutants have learned to work together for a change instead of fighting with each other, they would have won. Now, Snarf, who agrees with the Thunder Kittens, he said, well, then again, the mutants would have blown themselves up to bits. That's true, Panthro says when he agrees with Snarf. He says, well, on the other hand, they could have blown us up too. But guess what? That plan backfired. And so was Mumm-ra's, because he too would have gotten control of the sphere itself. But instead, he didn't. So now that the spaceship is back in outer space, Lionel, however, told Snarf that he can do the honors of blowing up the ship. So that's exactly what Snarf did. And with the push of the button, the ship exploded. So as the Thundercats had watched it on screen, you know what this means. Thanks to the Thundercats, Third Earth is saved, and harmony has been restored. Well, in Lionel's case, he not only agrees with Panthro, but he says that all we did was shake up the universe. He's not kidding. So yes, it is true. The bad guys' plan had backfired, and it's all thanks to the Thundercats. So that ends episode 54.